you know.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
You know, it would be particularly fitting right now if we had some elevator music to put in the background.
Yeah. Do, do, do,
Well,
do,
Just
we
do,
to...
do, do, do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just to get these waiting room, doctor waiting room vibes
Yeah.
also.
Just need some really bad lighting and, an uncomfortable looking secretary at the front desk.
Sweet.
okay, we start having people again. Alfonso and Daniel or Daniel, let me know. And as Kenny and Moreno were saying, we are live here on Big Blue Button, which is the open source platform we use as the Linux Professional Institute for webinars and chat rooms. And we are going to be live on YouTube, again LPI channel as well. Hi Gerald or Gerald, I don't know. Hello. And we'll give a few more minutes to people to get in or to start watching on the channel, YouTube one. Hello. Just a second. And hello, Simo. I see Simone Bertulli, an acquaintance of Kenny as well, because in a previous episode of this web series, we had Simo as a guest talking about membership.
Yeah,
Thank
hi,
you for
Simo.
joining us.
Glad to see you again.
It's nice because I think ideally everyone could participate uh, with the sound, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, that's nice. For a webinar, it's kind of
It's a
nice.
it's a very open platform.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a bit scary how open it is, but it's very open. Yeah.
But you can still mute someone who says something offensive right now. So
Yeah. Or if they
Yeah.
like have a loud keyboard or something.
yeah,
Which is the most frequent issue
It is.
for us. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a lot of nerds at LPI, and we like to use our mechanical keyboards.
I
Wireless.
do too, but I don't have clicky switches. So
It's
oh, that looks amazing.
it's it feels good too to type on it. It feels like a really nice old school typewriter, but it is loud. So I will try to keep
Uh-huh.
the key interaction to a minimum.
You're using the blue switches,
I'm not sure what's actually built into it. To be honest with you.
but they're clicky.
Yeah, they're very clicky. Yeah, I mean, well, if I do that, I'll start
Uh,
messing up stuff. So I better not.
well, technically, you can do it while we wait for a second.
Yeah, that's true. True.
But if you wanna hear mine, then I can do mine as
Okay.
well.
Okay.
Uh,
As as nerd as you get it. Again.
The sound check. It's part of the process.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mine sounds like a bit
Bad.
muffled. It's not clicky. It's not linear, but it's quite relaxing to listen to.
Not too bad. I mean, when I really get going, my wife, like, I hammer the heck out of these things, and she's like, "What are you doing to that poor keyboard?" I'm like, "I'm just trying to get something done." I feel like a
I
family
heard
opera.
worse. Yeah, it's not too loud either, to be honest.
Oh, when
I've
I get,
heard,
yeah, oh yeah, I've heard some rough ones.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I think we have in mind, Kenny, the same colleague. One
Yeah.
colleague has the loudest ever heard. Yeah,
It sounds like a war zone when he types.
yeah, yeah. Heavy metal keyboard or something like that. Hi, Teobaldo. Meanwhile, we have another attendee. We wait just one more minute, and at 5 we will start the actual webinar, which is again live here on LPI's Big Blue Button and live on LPI again YouTube channel. Hi, Matteo. Everybody. Hi, Giovanni. Thank you for joining us.
You know what would be cool? To have a flag beside every name so we can get an idea
Yeah.
on the.
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool.
Well, according to the names, we have a nice Italian representative all right here. Okay, guys, welcome to this webinar. I am Max Roveri. Hi, Lars. I am a community manager for LPI, Linux Professional Institute, and I am very happy to be here sharing the floor, the digital one at least, with Kenny Armstrong and Moreno Razzoli. Kenny is LPI training and technology specialist, and Moreno is a YouTuber, a FOSS evangelist, and he is a Linux Professional Institute Platinum ATP partner as well. Even if the Linux Professional Institute is hosting us today for this webinar has a specific purpose, if you want, and a specific topic that is related to the Upgrade to Linux initiative. The Upgrade to Linux initiative is supported by the Linux Professional Institute and by other partners, Moro Linux being one of them. And I think the introduction is enough, and I will leave now the mics to Kenny and Moreno to know more about what the 5 mistakes to avoid when you upgrade to Linux are. I'll be here for you guys, for you attendees. If you want to ask any question to Kenny or Moreno, just use the chat. And again, I think by the accent you can get that I am originally from Italy. So if you are more comfortable in using the Italian speaking or writing down, I will translate for Kenny later. Thank you, guys. Moreno and Kenny, to you. Thanks.
Hi. Yeah, thanks, Max. Hi, everyone. As Max already stated, I work with the Linux Professional Institute, and our mission is to promote the use of open source by supporting the people who work with it. This is both on software and hardware. We make no differentiation there. One such avenue that this might take is when someone first tries Linux after years of working with something like, say, Microsoft Windows or Apple's Mac OS. Uh, Many newcomers to Linux will often assume that the experience will be just like that of using Microsoft Windows, that they just double click on something and off they go. And sometimes they get flustered or even angry at finding out that the experience provided by Windows, or I'm sorry, provided by the two systems, is not identical. Sometimes this alone would be enough of a barrier to entry for newcomers, but many new Linux users will push on through and grow to really appreciate and enjoy how Linux works for them. One such individual who is our guest today is Moreno, and please forgive me if I did this wrong, is Razali? Razoli?
Yeah, it's a
Pronounce?
bit difficult. Razzoli.
Sorry.
Razzoli,
Okay, all
yeah.
right, cool. Um, Moreno describes some of the more common pitfalls a new Linux user might encounter when they first start with using Linux as their system. First off, again, I would like to thank you, Moreno, for sharing your experience with us. And when you first started using Linux yourself, did you feel comfortable with it? What were the early days of your experience like?
Well, Kenny, if I felt comfortable, absolutely not. I felt intrigued by it, really. But comfortable? Not at all. I had no idea what I was doing, and the quick fix for everything I didn't like or didn't work was just to format the disk and reinstall everything from scratch. And by from scratch, I mean rerun the Ubuntu installer or
Right,
something like that.
right.
You know, there was this one time that I was trying to record a video, but there was no audio coming from the microphone.
Mm.
And so I figured maybe another distro will work. And it did. Surprisingly, I found Mandriva,
Oh, I remember that one.
which, yeah, that worked out of the box.
Yeah, yeah.
Pretty sure it was just a matter of default configuration that was different from my Ubuntu, but that did work. So I kept it and recorded, I think, a couple of videos. And then I realized I couldn't install software like I did on Ubuntu because it's another family of distribution.
Right.
So I switched back and forth and over again. So there was this time after this transitioning period, which I decided to settle on just one distribution and try to solve problems. Only issue is I didn't really try to understand the problem I was trying to solve. So I kept going on and on these forums or following online guides, but totally randomly, without even reading the full question. And then, unsurprisingly, everything went to broken to even more disastrously broken. And yeah, and then we repeated the cycle. But there's a twist to it because after some time, I understood that the hard way of doing things, to take the time to understand, actually saves you the time later. But
Yep.
that is something we will talk about later on.
Yeah, I completely understand, and it sounds like your initial foray into Linux mirrors my own almost to a T. One of the first ones that I tried out was Linux Mandrake, and this is back when it would they would sell it in a box at a store, and that's what I started off with. And but yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I know the feeling. Um, what would you say is the primary pitfall that many brand new Linux users might what would they encounter when they first step into Linux?
But I think it's the first and most common. It's is trying to use it as if it were Windows or Mac OS. I mean, it's like going on a date with this new girl and tell her, I like you because you remind me of my ex-girlfriend.
Oh,
It doesn't really work, right?
oh no, no, no.
That's not starting with the right foot. So when you transition to Linux and try to use it as it was Windows, for instance, yeah, Linux can run some applications, some Windows applications with Wine, this compatibility layer, but sometimes most often you have to ask yourself, is it the right way to do it, or am I missing something? Am I missing on some cool opportunity to try some new software, open source software, very quality stuff out there, and just needs to be discovered and tested?
Yep, that's true. That's true. There's often many alternatives out there that'll work on multiple platforms that that can work better than some of the older proprietary stuff. Um,
Yeah, but there is also another thing. I mean, installing software is what I think drives you nuts at the beginning
yes.
of the process, because you're used to mostly look for the software in search engines, go to developer website, download it, install it, we're running the installer program. That's not how it works at all in Linux. So if you try and do that in Linux, most often you will find Windows software, or maybe some ill-packaged software, or not even that most of the times. So in Linux, you must install everything you can through a package manager. And I've seen Windows and Mac OS start pushing really this approach lately, but it doesn't look like it's really the standard. It didn't catch up quite as well as Linux does. Um, but the concept is of a software store, just like you do in Android, and that way you can keep everything organized. You know everything from down to the teeth what you've installed, and you can just update everything, system and application, with one click or one command.
Right.
So
Right. Yeah, we do see quite a bit of the App Store paradigm, if you will. That's it, a lot of distributions are trying to push their own, and so it's becoming more of a common thing. And that can be looked at in two different ways. The first is like, oh, everybody just wants to copy each other, but the way it could also be looked at is the fact that it's more of a really good transition tool that new users have the ability to say, oh, I'm used to going to this application to find this particular web browser. Well, that's, if they just look for something that looks like on Ubuntu, they have like the little shopping bag icon. They click on that, they know that they're in an app store, and off they go. So it's um, yeah, the more advanced users wouldn't bother with it, but those that are brand new to Linux, it's a welcome application that they can use as they first start out. So yeah, good point.
yeah, I think it's very important and convenient to say that it's just a graphical front end to what you would already do,
Hmm.
otherwise do in a command line. So the most advanced user wouldn't do it too differently, except they would do it directly straight into the command line. I also like so much about Linux this concept that everything you do in the graphical interface, you can also do in the command line. There
Right.
is this almost one-to-one parallelism, and that is, in my opinion, the best way to do things. Not because it looks complicated and makes you look like you're an expert of the field, but really because you can change and swap, mix and swap interfaces, graphical UIs in Linux, and certain things will work differently if you do so. But if you know the command line way, that doesn't change.
Right.
You only change the graphical front end. So
Yep. Yeah. Um, Something else I want to bring up is that there are many different pieces of software that people use on Windows. and we kind of hinted at this earlier, that there's a lot of popular software that's on Windows, but it's also available on Linux as well. Getting used to these applications could ease the transition to Linux, which is another point that new Linux users need to be aware of when trying to set up their systems for the first time. What is something else that they should be aware of when a new Linux user sits down at their computer and actually try to use it, try to get some work done with it?
Well, like you said, you should always try out on open source software first. I mean, you generally don't find many commercial software on Linux because Linux prefers open source software. But you can say the opposite. I mean, many of open source software are also available for Microsoft Windows and other platforms. So you can get accustomed to what you already use if you start using it, and then transition to Linux and most of the application you already use and know quite a bit. So I think it's best to start looking for open source and free software alternatives, if you will. Even before transitioning, that could be a good idea to ease out the transition process.
Right.
But then again, if you want to really take advantage of the new operating system, it's worth not to resist trying the command line and try to really understand what you're doing. Linux is a technical operating system. It's not like Windows. It doesn't want to be that way. It doesn't want to be the same. So it's right to get used to something, but it's also right to, when you switch to something else, to get the new way of working with that, I think.
That's a good point. That and like you mentioned earlier, that you'll find a lot of forum posts where people will say, "Just run this command and you got this thing fixed." And a lot of people are just there. The idea of working at a terminal just scares them. That it's that's under the hood. I don't want to do that. But yeah, you're right. It's a good thing to get used to it. If you're going to work with Linux, it's not a bad way to go. Even on Mac OS, there are just some things that just you can do quick, a whole lot quicker, a lot more direct if you use the command line. And Windows is trying to do the same thing with their PowerShell. But yeah, it's just it's there. It's a tool that we've had in computer operating systems since the beginning. So just might as well just go ahead and get used to it, get your feet wet, and try some things out. So yeah. Let's see. So what about compatibility? If somebody picks up, if they go to their local computer store and they pick up a brand new computer, and they don't want to use Windows because 9 times out of 10 it's pre-installed on there already. They go to install Linux. What do you think is something that they should take a look at before they take that step of purchasing a brand new computer?
Well, I'm happy to say that the situation has improved quite a lot since I started and even before. But there's still you still need to be somewhat cautious when you buy new hardware if you plan to use Linux on it. I think the best thing to do before heading to the shop or buying anything is to do a quick research on anything, really any search engine, the precise name and model of the hardware you're going to buy, whether it's a full-blown desktop PC or laptop or even just a Wi-Fi antenna. I mean, that is essential if you don't want to get in trouble with buying stuff and then figuring out if you can make it work on Linux. Just buy stuff that works out of the box in Linux. If you are a mid-experienced user, I think it's something you already do. But if you're a beginner, you're not used to think that way, because the majority operating system, the predominant operating system is Windows, and of course you're gonna find out-of-the-box compatibility with any hardware on Windows. Linux is very well compatible, very well covered for being a non-predominant operating system. But of course, it's not 100%. Not every business who makes hardware has interest in developing a Linux driver for it.
Right. I remember that used to be a very scary thing back in the earlier days of trying to get Linux to run on something that has some normal piece of hardware, but you couldn't have, you didn't have a driver for it. Like I remember Win modems used to be that way. There's like a software-based modem that would only work if you had a Windows driver for it, because there wasn't enough hardware to actually use it on a system that would just talk directly to hardware. But that has gotten way better over the years. Especially, nobody uses modems much anymore anyway. But yeah, for the vast majority of hardware, that's for the most part a thing of the past. You may still run into things every once in a while, like a fingerprint reader is a good example of one, where take some brands like Lenovo, they'll put a line out that has a fingerprint reader for login that already has a driver in Linux for it, and then they change up the line the following year, and then now it's a different model fingerprint reader that no longer works. So things like that can happen, but like you said, it's much better than what it used to be.
Yeah, to sum it up, I would say that all essential hardware is pretty much covered, at least if you do some homework before buying.
Right.
Stuff like, the fancy stuff, the RGB controls or fingerprint authentication, stuff like that, might work or might not work. Sometimes the community makes wonders in that regard. I mean, I've got a ThinkPad laptop over there, which has no fingerprint reader support. Well, it didn't have it, but now it looks like the reverse engineering project is going pretty good. So we already have an experimental driver to try it out. So that's good news, but it doesn't work from the day one. In that case, it works maybe after a few years. So that's another interesting consideration. Buying bleeding edge Neo hardware on launch might not be a good idea. If you wait 1 year, you are pretty much sure that everything you're gonna buy is already tested. And if you wait even more, even the fancy stuff maybe will work then.
Right.
If the product was successful, I would say.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Video cards can do that every once in a while, depending on the vendor. Like if you have an AMD video card, they're typically pretty good about their open source drivers. NVIDIA is trying to change a little bit with that. So for those of you that are looking to switch to Linux and you're gamers, just take special notice of the type of video card that you have on your system, and make sure double check to see if there's drivers that will support it for Linux as well as your other platforms.
Yeah, there is this one website, Linux slash hardware, Linux minus hardware.org, which lets you find in a pretty large database a precise model, whether it's an NVIDIA or any video card or any other hardware for that matter, and tell you it has quite extensive compatibility reports for every distribution. So that's a great resource. We should link it somewhere.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, and it is a good resource. The older hardware compatibility lists, you'll see them come and go, but that one's been around for a while and it's pretty good. While we're on the subject of hardware, that the good thing is nowadays that there are hardware vendors that actually sell systems with Linux pre-installed on their devices. Some examples are System 76 here in the States. There's Tuxedo Computers over in Europe. Dell, Lenovo, who are international. They also sell systems with Linux pre-installed. And here recently, if I'm not mistaken, there's a Hewlett Packard developer laptop that's been selling with Pop! OS, which is from System 76, pre-installed on it. So yeah, there's we're seeing more of this nowadays, which is fantastic. In the past, we've seen hardware vendors kind of come and go with their Linux offerings, but now it's much more stable. It's much more widespread than it used to be. It's at this point, it's a better world for Linux if you want to get something that's already pre-installed. You don't have to worry about hardware compatibility from day one because you know that there's a company that's already tested all this for you. So let's say that you've already checked out your hardware compatibility and you understand that what you're about to install is not Windows, that you're doing something completely different. What would be the next pitfall for a new Linux user to avoid?
Well, the first one that I can think of then is, you already set your mind on switching to Linux, and what you do next is you go to a search engine and look for Linux download. But Linux is just a kernel, so you have to download a full distribution. So you get into this rabbit hole of distro reviews. I've done quite a bit myself.
Yeah, I'm guilty.
And if you are a total beginner, yeah, it's not easy to understand how to choose the distro. You might just get intrigued by the looks of it. Maybe it looks very gorgeous. It has a nice default theme. It has a dock. It has maybe it reminiscence of Mac OS or something you like, and then you download it. But that's not the ideal way of doing it because every distribution can be made to look like any other distribution. So it's not like that really matters. In a couple hours of work, maybe you can get it on every distribution. What really matters is what's under the hood again, and that's why it is so important to know your beast. And if you're a beginner, I would say any distribution is good to start with. Maybe there are less scary distributions and somewhat more scary distribution. I wouldn't recommend Gen 2 or
right,
or something like that, Linux from scratch.
I was gonna say that one. Yep.
But maybe, I mean, who am I to say that? Man, a few years ago, I wouldn't even said it's a good idea to start with Arch Linux, but nowadays it's pretty much very much easier to install. It's very well documented, and I think it's almost a good idea actually to start if you're curious, if you're that kind of person that can sit in front of a computer and read through documentation, not too much documentation. That's really going to give you a boost on knowledge, and you get your feet wet and you start knowing the system you're working with from day zero. Whereas every other Linux distribution, I would say, installs everything automatically for you, and it's very easy, straightforward. It's a 5-click process. But the issue is that if anything goes wrong, it's then that you have to do your research and understand what subsystem went critical and how to fix that. You don't know anything. Most of the things I've discovered about my distribution on desktop is by having an issue with that system. Maybe the Bluetooth doesn't work anymore, and then I start reading about Bluetooth on Linux, and then I build up my knowledge. That is not wrong. Nothing wrong about it. But if you can have perspective even before that, that's great. Maybe that's the whole point. Maybe that's why I think it's part of the reason why the team has decided to not give a fully automated installer utility. And that's why I've also realized personal course, on how to install and use Arch Linux. The course is not on how to install Arch Linux itself. It's about knowing the system. It's almost like Linux from scratch, but easier.
Right,
So
yeah.
that's a good starting point. Yeah.
It's more like a set
And
of
so,
intros. Yeah.
yeah. You have just what you need to get started. Nothing more, nothing less, and it's perfect for me. But of course, there are other factors to factor in when you decide for a distribution. When you choose, like I would say, maybe the most important is philosophy.
Mhm.
For instance, if you choose free software only distribution, that's great, but don't expect everything except don't expect everything to necessarily work out of the box. Maybe
Right.
the Wi-Fi card won't work because it's not, maybe it's proprietary, the driver,
Right.
or maybe the video codecs won't work. Maybe you can't play H.264 videos locally or stuff like that. And that can really be diminishing and can really hurt the user experience for someone who does nothing, knows nothing about licensing and those kind of issues. They will just think that Linux doesn't work. The
Yes.
thing is, they just made the wrong choice at the beginning.
To kind of piggyback off of that a little bit, I remember, gosh, I'm going to age myself here. About 20 years ago, I was installing a much younger version of Fedora on a system, and it didn't have. And of course, all my music was ripped from CDs, and they were in MP3 files. Well, I couldn't play it on the system. I just installed it. It was brand spanking new, and I just could not listen to my music, and that drove me crazy. And then this was back when Fedora or / Red Hat, however you want to look at it, they used to sell a download that would let you play MP3s, but you had to pay for it. And in the Windows world, that's just you're not exposed to that. That's because Microsoft takes care of that kind of thing for you. Nowadays, it's nowhere near as much of an issue as it once was because the MP3 codec is now I think it's in the public domain, or it's at the point where it's not as restrictive license. It's not as restrictive license wise as it once was, and for like you mentioned H.264 X264 codec videos, we're even getting to a point to where that is not going to be much of an issue because there's a lot of movement towards AV1 as a codec. I mean, Netflix is using it, YouTube is using it, and it comes completely license free. You don't have to worry about any kind of royalties or anything like that. So it's even that alone is getting to be a much better field than what we once had to deal with on a daily basis. So yeah, you're right. It also kind of boils down to philosophy itself. It's easy to get lost into the philosophy of like I only want all things free on here, and free as in like speech, beer, the whole 9 yards. And that's great. It is awesome and more power to you. But like you said, everything you want to work may not work out of the box. And that's part of where the fun to me comes in. It's almost like a mystery. Like, well, what will work? What can I do to make this happen on my system? And that's when I started discovering more about open source codecs, about open source video file formats, about open source different types of open source projects in general, because it kind of not necessarily forces you, but helps guide you in that direction to look for those alternatives. And it's it's awesome because you can learn so much more by getting into those different types of topics. So yeah,
That's very interesting consideration because it looks and it sounds very much like what I was saying and talking about before about hardware compatibility issues, Bluetooth not working, maybe because there was something. When something breaks or doesn't work is when you have an opportunity to learn something about. Many people don't understand this and just take the annoyance. I mean, it's annoying, that for sure, but if you don't do that shift in perspective, if you don't understand that having issues gives you the opportunity to learn something new,
Yep.
I think you are using it wrong in some way, you know?
Yeah. And to echo back to a little bit about what you're saying with Arch, and um, yeah, it's slightly, there's a little bit more of a learning curve to installing that one, which is great. But I will say this about the Arch project: out of all the documentation on the internet, Arch has probably got some of the best Linux documentation for free software that I've seen in anything. So even if you're not using Arch, I still use their documentation because it's so well written, so it's great. You could use it for any, you gotta pay a little bit of attention to the differences with how Arch, where they may install something as opposed to, say, Debian or Ubuntu. But yeah, for the most part, Arch documentation it's a great place to go, whether you're advanced or brand spanking new. It's fantastic.
Yeah. And documentation is really a really piece of wonder, I think, in the computing industry. For by that I mean, if you need help, many people who come from the closed source software industry are accustomed to answers like it works, it doesn't work, this can be done, or this cannot be done. But on Linux, I always say this: there are 50 shades of it works and it can be done. It's not 1 or 0; it's more like analogical, and I think really digging into problems, into how ways to solve them, really helps you develop skills that are important, or also in other areas of your life and career, if that's what we are talking about
Right.
at some point. But that was actually a segue to something else I was about to say. Yeah, please go ahead.
Oh, no, that's fine. Uh, we hinted at it earlier about about one of the great things about Linux is that you can make each Linux installation look like another one, or look like a completely different operating system, where you could completely tweak it for your own looks, for your own aesthetic designs. Um, but in the Windows world, you could kind of do that, but sometimes you'd have to pay for third-party software that would allow those customizations. And I'm guilty. I did it myself too, just because I didn't want, you know, I took the little Windows flag out of the start button, and I wanted to have like the flag of Scotland there, because I was just really nerdy about that. But I would have to pay for software to modify a DLL to make that happen. Um, with Linux, that's a non-issue. It's just, if you want to look like something else, look at the documentation for how to modify something. You don't have to pay for anything, and you can make it look however you want. So it's a fun aspect of Linux. Not everybody gets into it. I get that, but it's something that you can do if you want to. So next, what is another common pitfall that new Linux users have to contend with? Like if they run into a problem, um, what's an issue that they could how could they resolve that issue?
Well, of course, first thing you do, or you should do, when you run into a problem is look for the error or something like that in a search engine. And another thing that comes to my mind is on Windows, for instance, many times you get a bit of a description, but mostly there are error codes, hexadecimal error codes that really tell you nothing about what's really happening, and you're pretty much driven into Microsoft forums where there are people there to help you. But many times the suggestion can be format, reboot, reinstall everything. It's not really that is what I was doing when I started using Linux. It's not different. We can do better in Linux.
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
It's just because everything is so open. There is no need to camouflage every error code, every error state in a special code that only Microsoft or who knows who can understand. And there are many people who are really competent and willing to give you some help. So you will find, I think, the most, or maybe among the most useful forums and with really good answers. Maybe, like I was saying, there are 50 shades of everything here. So maybe there are 50 shades of your problem, and the first result is not going to apply to you.
Right.
And that is also because the reason why you have to understand the problem a little bit before trying to apply any suggestion.
Right.
And try to understand what the commands that you find on internet forums really do before pasting them into your terminal. But generally speaking, you shouldn't refrain from asking for help on those forums or looking the wikis. I know it might sound like it might look like you're wasting your time, because you're wasting time reading a wiki on a more broader thread or topic just to solve one little thing, but you need context to everything.
Exactly. Yeah.
So context is key, and you're not wasting time. You're just getting to know the system.
Right.
That's it.
Right.
And there is any kind of even if you don't get to the solution with forums and stuff like that. I mean, there are support channels, IRC, there are chats for the individual projects that you might have trouble with. And the only thing I think, the most important thing to be precise about here is how to make questions. You should ask questions in an intelligent way, in a way that helps you, others help you.
Right. Right.
Because
don't just go out there and say this doesn't work. Well, what doesn't work? And and provide some information.
Okay.
Yeah.
What does it mean that it doesn't work? What have you tried to solve the issue? What results did you get from your previous attempts? And stuff like that really help in reducing the time from the problem to the solution, reducing the back and forth. Have you already tried this? Yes, I did. Why didn't you write up the thing? I mean, the more detail you can give when you ask the question, the more elements you're giving to who can help you and want to help you better.
Yep, that's true.
Guys,
there is also,
Guys, thank you. I know you could go on forever. I know that. Okay, but we should start now the Q&A session. Any last comment from you before throwing in a few comments and questions from our audience?
Maybe I can share with you. I was reading the PC Linux OS wiki some time ago, and I found the 10 commandments to the good Linux user, and one of them was Linux opens up a whole new world of options and possibility, try everything you can. That really resounded in me because that's what I do normally, but I think it's not what everyone does, and I think it's important to understand that you're not using a limited operating system with someone that tells you what you can do and what you can't do. You can really do anything you like with any device you like. Sometimes people ask me, why do you install Linux on your MacBook Pro? Because I can. Why do you install Linux or on your Kindle, Amazon Kindle ebook reader? Again, because I can. I want. It's just sparkle up my creativity. Everyone has its triggers, but I think being a Linux user, that is an important bit of being a Linux user.
Yeah, I would add
Okay,
that
thank you.
I read this
Go
once.
ahead.
I read this once a few years ago, and I wish I could source it, but I don't know who said it first. But it read that Linux is not an operating system; it is an adventure, and that's really true because once you start using it, it opens up, like Moreno said, opens up a world of possibilities, and where you go from there is entirely up to you. You can go down that rabbit hole if you want to. You don't have to, but it's a fun platform to work with, and you can't really say that about a lot of software. But I can say that with Linux, it can be a lot of fun.
Thank you, Kenny, and thank you, Moreno. I am wrapping up here, okay, for you with few of the comments and questions that came through while you were having this absolutely interesting conversation. I am putting together a couple of comments and questions from Lars and Daniel. Thank you, Lars and Daniel. That are related, if you want, to the very early stage of upgrading to Linux. So, what is the best distro for beginners? Which one is the closest to Windows? So, the closest to something that probably you know already. And Lars was commenting that he told us in the chat that he still is a Windows user and he wants to start trying Linux. Okay, so he was kind of scared. It sounded a little bit complicated. So where you can actually find help?
You want to take this one?
Yeah. I will just, I mean, I don't want to sound evil, but I think what's the most Windows-like distro is a bit of a ill-posed question because, as I was saying, it's not going to be anything like Windows. You just get over it. It's not like Windows. There are some distributions who remind of Windows, like Linux Mint, because they have a graphical interface that looks a bit like Windows. But when you get some problem or you need to do pretty much anything at all, of course, you're not going to do it like you do it on Windows. But that's part of the process. I mean, many people, to answer you, many people recommend Linux Mint. I've never tried it, but
Yeah, I would echo that. From my experiences, I agree. Linux Mint is probably a really good jumping off point. If you're brand new to Linux, you've never used another operating system, it's a good stepping stone. And to echo what Moreno said, that just you do need to get over the thought that you're using a Windows replacement, because it's not. It's its own thing. But you can do a lot of the same things with it. So you get a little bit of the comfort with, you have an easy to use graphical desktop environment with menus in the same locations where you might expect them on a Windows box. But just remember, as once you start using it, it's different. It's not like Windows. There's a wider range of software that's available to you. It's more secure. It's there to help you keep from messing yourself up, so to speak. But yeah, if you're looking to start over on a new platform, Linux Mint, but go in it with the understanding that it's not Windows.
Okay, Thank you, Moreno and Kenny. Another question from Eduardo, and it's again a question about the usability at the end of the day. Okay, can I do everything on a Linux computer as on a Windows computer? Is everything possible?
Well, I think if I can take this one,
Go ahead.
I mean, everything. I would say even more, but it depends on what you mean by everything. You cannot use the Adobe suite on it. You cannot use many proprietary stuff. Many of it is garbage anyways, but not gonna say that about the Adobe suite. I mean, not that I like it anyways, but uh, you can do much more on Linux. It just depends on the field, on the kind of work you're referring to.
Yeah, I would echo that as well. It's just that there are some open source alternatives. Some of them are great. Some of them don't quite cut it. Uh, you have to you have to run down the path of finding an alternative tool to do the same thing that you would do in a Windows world. But that being said, I've also seen a picture online. Somebody took a picture of a MacBook, and it said it's a $2,000 Facebook machine, and it makes sense because really a lot of stuff is just available on the web now anyway. My wife, she does sublimation printing, and she works with a printer that's in my house, but she has to go through a web app to actually use the printer. So more and more stuff is up in the cloud and on the web anyway. So as long as you can get to the internet, you could probably do a vast majority of what you can with Windows. And like Moreno said, you're going to be able to do a lot more too, because there's a whole lot more that you can do with Linux that you can't do with Windows. But yeah.
Thanks, Ken. And I'm linking here two different questions slash comment. One from Eduardo, one from Gerald. Okay, Eduardo was commenting your answer about the fact that okay, you can do everything, but what happens when it comes to transfer from a Linux machine to a Mac or a Windows user? Okay, and Gerald comment and question was more or less in the same tone, but if you want more on the hardware side, are there any package managers for all components like printers, scanners, and so on? So on a side, portability, on the other side, the reverse. How I can port in a printer that I have and it wasn't supposed to be used on Linux.
I mean, to start off with, you really don't have to do a whole lot of that anymore. Nowadays, the newer printers they use like the Bonjour protocol, which is as long as you're on the same network with that printer, you're 9 times out of 10 your computer's going to pick it up, and it doesn't matter if it's a Mac or if it's a Windows or a Linux machine. There are some printer companies that are a little cranky about that. They don't make it easy to discover their equipment. But for the most part, it's as long as you're on the same network, you can pick it up and run with it. There used to be, I don't know if Ubuntu does this anymore. They used to have an application that would port settings that you had from a Microsoft system and try to map them to not necessarily compatible, but a similar setup under Linux. And I don't know if they have that anymore. But that would be something to look into to see if there's some kind of tool that you could use. It really depends on what you want to do and what kind of data we're talking about and what other kind of external hardware that we're talking about. So each use case is going to be a little different depending on what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I would like to reiterate on that, Kenny, because it's true nowadays. There is a really good printing support. I mean, mostly every printer will work out of the box, and even more so, I would say. Many recent HP printers also support Google Cloud Printing and services like that, where you don't really configure the printer on your hardware, on your PC. You just link it to your Google account in this case. And then if you're logged in, from your browser, you can just send it over the cloud, and it will just be printing on its own via internet.
Yeah.
Not that I'm a particular fan of that approach, but that really solves the issue with drivers. You don't need any drivers for that.
Yeah.
So
thanks, Moreno. Just a comment from Anil. A statement, if you want, on embedded hardware devices, Linux is the key player. It is indeed. It is indeed. What the Upgrade to Linux initiative want to bring up is the fact that in Italy, okay, we have a site which is very nice, which is Mia Mamma usa Linux. My mother can use Linux. Okay, so if in a way, okay, the perspective of Upgrade to Linux is the fact that anybody can use Linux, grandmother, mother, whoever. And this would be, maybe, if there are not other and last comment or question, this would be the last question for today from Eduardo. This would be probably one with a very long answer, but I leave it to you, okay, Kenny and Moreno. Is everything free on Linux?
what do you mean by free?
Yeah.
Eduardo, what do you mean by free?
Free as in free beer?
Yeah, because we
Or
have to ask,
free as in free speech?
because that's a yes and a no question at the same time, in all honesty.
It's a tricky one.
Yeah, and I say that because there are software packages that you can freely download and install on Linux, but you can't look in to see what's on the internals. DaVinci Resolve, it's a popular video editing software platform that is even used in Hollywood. That's an example. You can download it, you can install it. So in that aspect, you don't have to pay any money for it up front. But if you want the extra features, you do have to pay money. But you can't look into the program itself to see what makes it tick. So that part's not free. There are some Office alternatives. Like we have LibreOffice, which is completely open source, completely free. But then you have other ones such as OnlyOffice and Smart Office or something like that. There's another one that provides compatibility with Microsoft Office formats, but again, it's not free because you have to pay for it. It just depends on what specific software platform you're looking to swap out.
Nonetheless, Moreno and Kenny, to the specific question from Eduardo, do I need to buy programs for Office, for example? The answer here is just no.
No.
You have LibreOffice, you don't have to.
Yeah, you don't have to. And that's a big
Yeah. On the economic front, yes, but I always refrain from putting focus on the economical aspect of the thing, because I think it's the least important thing nowadays. And from the dawn of the times, everyone can crack anything and have it free without paying. But I think what really makes a difference is the open source and free software more like approach, of the thing. It's that you can modify it. That's the added value. You can redistribute it. There is no central entity controlling what you can do, what you can't do with it. I think it's the most important part of the thing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Moreno. Thank you, Kenny. We are on top of the time slot we had. Thank you, Daniel. This is very inspiring. Well, this webinar was supposed to be, so thank you. If we succeeded, we are very happy about that. Let's see if we have any last comment or question here. Otherwise, we will. You're welcome, Gerald. Otherwise, we just say hello and ciao to our audience. And just follow. I'm going to reshare with you, okay, a couple of links about the Upgrade to Linux initiative and the blog post that is after this webinar. And I'm going to thank you all, guys, and stay tuned on social media channels of the Linux Professional Institute and of the Upgrade to Linux initiative for next issues, next series of webinars, and more to come. Thank you, everybody. And again, thank you so much, Moreno, for joining us, and Kenny for helping and co-piloting this.